YouTubers, welcome back to AZ2 Ozarks. I have not given you a garden update since early in the springtime, and boy, a lot has happened since then. So we have switched from early spring crops to summer crops, and now we are all the way into October facing our first frost, and I am switching over to winter and fall crops. But in the meantime, we're in a bit of a transitional phase. So I'll kind of walk you through our garden, show you what's going on, and talk about our plans moving forward. We will start in the greenhouse, and as you can see over here, the sides are open over there, but yet the sides are closed over here. That is because our highs have been getting into the 70s and our lows into the 40s. So it's not that hot summer weather anymore. And I will ultimately be closing it up today because we have some really low temperatures in the next week coming up. We're looking at potentially first frost a week from tomorrow. So all the good things of summer are potentially coming to an end. Here I have been switching over into fall Mizuna, which often can last all the way through the winter. And Mizuna is a very tasty oriental green, so it did well last year and I hope will continue doing well this year. I still have a volunteer tomato going on here. This is a green vernissage variety, so it never turns from green, it just softens as it ripens. I have some beets, some walking onions, Egyptian walking onions. I have some purple and green basil that are holding on. And down the entire center of the 110 feet of the greenhouse, I have tomatoes. And so the first probably 30 feet are paste tomatoes, and these are the ones that I use for canning. I prefer to do diced tomatoes when I can rather than sauces because I use a really lot of those. In between all of the tomatoes, I have been planting peas because I hope to get a fall crop of peas coming up. And the idea was that they would be able to start climbing up the tomatoes or the twine that I have for the tomatoes and replace those plants. Now, some of these tomatoes are really tall and they're touching the plastic. Last year, I think that was my downfall when frost hit because the tomatoes that were touching the plastic, they froze very quickly. And I think that if I trim all of these tomatoes away from the plastic, we can probably extend them a little bit further, even past frost here inside the greenhouse. On this side, I have planted hundreds of turnips, and you can see that only 2 are here. We had a really big problem with grasshoppers coming in and eating all of my little new sprouts. The grasshoppers are starting to die off, and I've planted a lot more plants, but I'm out of turnip seeds, so I think I have beets planted over here now instead. We do have one watermelon plant that was a volunteer outside, and my son brought it in here. I really don't think it'll fruit in time. We have a few tamarillo trees that never really grew very tall this year, but I'm going to try and overwinter them and hope for fruit next year. All of the area that you see is blank has all been planted with fall crops, but it's just a matter of waiting for them to come up. And I still have lots of tomatoes over here. These are like a cherry variety. Continuing down the row, you can see there's just lots and lots of tomatoes. Tomatoes have been a very good crop for us. And then I even have some peas with flowers on them. Here is some chard that has lasted the whole winter through. Now in the summer we got a really bad bout of blister beetles. Blister beetles are something I had never heard of before, but they are quite the adversary in the garden. They can really devour crops and do a number on them. So I had, I think, 8 chard plants, and this is all that is left. They're finally starting to look better as the blister beetles have died off. But when you touch a blister beetle, they excrete some sort of a chemical that causes you to blister on your skin, and it's painful. So I had to wear gloves to pick them off, but that's another thing. We never sprayed this year. A lot of people locally spray for bugs, and we don't do that. So what I think, well, I have a theory that ultimately eventually will come into balance with the predators of the insects, with the quantity of the plants, with the insects that are harmful. I feel like we'll come into a balance eventually. And so I didn't even use organic sprays such as BT or neem oil, which I thought I really would use this year, but I don't know. I really feel like someday we'll achieve a balance in a natural way. In the meantime, I lose about half of my tomatoes to caterpillar damage, but at the same time, we have goats and chickens that I can just give those to, and so it's not all a waste or a loss. Here I have planted a whole bunch of cauliflower down this row, but you can also see that worms have been a problem here. This is the cabbage worms, and I've just been going through and picking them off or squishing them. It looks like this morning there's not too many. I was just squishing them yesterday, but they do quite a number on the plants, so some of them have more damage than others. I hope though that they'll be able to survive and continue doing well. On the opposite side of the greenhouse, I have the broccoli planted. Now, in this second half of the greenhouse, it is the new half of the greenhouse that we just established this year. And so this is all new horse manure that I had put on this side. And here's the thing. We had a really hard time growing this year, specifically on this half of the greenhouse. And there's a reason for that, and I really hate it, and I don't like to bring it up, but it's something that I think all of us gardeners need to be aware of. There is a thing called persistent herbicide, and it is a chemical that a lot of farmers spray on their fields in order to prevent weeds in their hay fields and their pastures for their cattle. And this persistent herbicide is relatively new, probably within the last 10 to 15 years. And it is something that supposedly doesn't affect the animals that eat the grasses. You can spray it on the grasses and immediately begin grazing the animals on it. There's no waiting period. And so farmers view it as generally safe, and they use it pretty frequently. One of the more common ones is called Grazon. Well, that persists in the manure of the animals who eat this hay and straw, or hay rather, and the grasses. And in their manure, it doesn't break down through composting. And as a result, it stays in the compost for up to 10 years. And it's very harmful for plants, and especially your nightshade plants. So your tomatoes, peppers, peas tend to be extremely sensitive. Your lettuces and greens are also very sensitive. It seems as though the manure that I put on this half of the greenhouse was all affected. And I had purchased it from a local horse, I don't know, boarder, or I don't know what you call them, a farmer, someone who raises and boards horses. And I had asked if it was, if they had used sprayed hay or if it wasn't. And I was very clear that I wanted it to be organic, and she assured me that it was. Well, it doesn't seem as though it was. And the proof is in the pudding, really, because we lost hundreds and hundreds of seeds that I had planted that just never flourished. They would come up and then immediately die. Hundreds of small immature plants I had planted in it early in the year just died. I even had more mature plants that I planted, and they would yellow and many die, but they struggled. And we'll get down to the end down here. I'll show you some tomato plants that have just only in the last week or two had their first ripe tomatoes. And so that's really a long time and very disappointing that it would have taken that long to grow in this soil. So unfortunately, a lot of my twine holding up the tomatoes has broken and fallen down. But these two plants on the end have just started having ripe tomatoes. They don't have any today. But this is a result of persistent herbicide. And you can see over here, see a lot of the peppers are just kind of dying and yellow. And that's not because of the weather change. They just never did well. I put mature plants in there that I had purchased and they just died. It's very sad, very disappointing. But this is something we need to be aware of. And I had confronted this woman about the herbicide in the manure, and she claimed that there was no way, it's impossible, but she would go ahead and get it tested. And this has been a couple months, and I've never heard back as far as her getting it tested. But in the meantime, I look on Facebook Marketplace for ads for hay and things, straw for our goats, and I was looking at a particular ad for some square bales for the goats, and I asked the seller publicly on the thread if it had been sprayed, and she said yes, it was sprayed. And the very next comment was from this woman who sells her horse manure saying she was interested, contact her, she'd take it all. And that was a really big public slap in the face as far as I felt, and proof that she doesn't care about the quality of what she's receiving, yet she is okay with selling it and falsifying that it is organic and it's not. So you've really got to watch out for that as a gardener. It's harmful to your garden, but that brings me to the point that brassicas are not supposed to be affected. And brassicas would be your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, kohlrabi, things like that, are not supposed to be affected by the persistent herbicide. And so those are things that I am planting over here for my fall garden. And that way I can still use this space, and hopefully over time we'll be able to do better with it as I amend it and move forward. So over here is more cauliflower, and you can see the little kittens. They keep attacking the butter for the moths, which is fine by me, because especially those little white moths are the ones that lay the caterpillar eggs that are the cabbage worms. And in the second half of the greenhouse in the center, because I have this affected manure that I cannot continue planting peas in, because peas will die in this immediately. And I have tried, trust me. So I have some different purple cabbages in the center row. And of course you saw the peppers over there where it's hit and miss. I've got some hanging on and others have died, and all of them are very delayed. So you figure these plants are several months old, and some of them are just getting their very first peppers. So that's disappointing. Are you showing me a pepper over here?
Mm-hmm. Like one.
Okay, yeah. So those are Marconi peppers right there. But you can see the sad little peppers there dying. But that brings us out here to our display of Missouri weeds. So I recently had some medical stuff going on that was keeping me from doing the best at tending my garden. And so the weeds have really gotten out of control. You can see how long they are, but they grow amazing here. So that's our Missouri weeds. I have not stayed up on them. I'm going to try and get back into getting this under control. Here is a Mexican sunflower plant that it doesn't really serve any edible purpose. However, it is a favorite for pollinators, and you'll see some pretty butterflies all over it. And we have bees and all kinds of stuff. Wasps will frequent this plant. Plus, they're just a really pretty pop of color. As we're getting towards the end of the season, it's become a bit unruly and kind of messy looking, but that's okay. It was very beautiful for the whole season, and so I will definitely grow them again next year. This area over here is where I had my mounds of melons. I had 3 watermelon varieties, a cantaloupe, and a honeydew variety. And we produced many, many melons throughout the season. And they enjoyed them, the kids did. I'm allergic to melons, so I don't eat them. And I just started weeding this area. It looked just as bad as this, but I've gotten this starting to get under control because I have artichoke plants and they were totally choked out by weeds, and so I wanted to give them a chance now that I saw that they were surviving. So this is that same manure, and these artichoke plants were planted indoors February 1st, and it's now October 9th, I believe. And so that long, and this is the amount of growth we've had. They've been so stunted. So I don't think they'll produce artichokes this year. I'm going to try and overwinter them into next year. I don't know if that will be effective or not. Here's more. These are the same plants planted February 1st. Just tiny, barely even secondary leaves on these guys. And here we go. I still have my fruit trees in pots, hoping to get the orchard squared away in the spring. We'll see how that goes. More weeds. I had started weeding in this area. And here is a patch of sunflower, or my goodness, sweet potatoes. And this year, all the sweet potatoes I started from slips that I had made on potatoes from last year's harvest, rather than last year I had purchased the slips. So I don't think there's as many as last year, and I also started them about 4 weeks later, but I hope to still get a good harvest, and I will probably harvest them next week, right before the frost, or after the very first mild frost that we get. I do have some regular potatoes intertwined in here. And there's definitely some carrots hiding under there that I had started in the spring. Here are our okra plants. This is Jing Orange variety, which produces a burgundy okra. And we have harvested so many of these throughout the year. I pickled over 50 jars for pickling okra because that guy over there loves them so much. And he told me he didn't want me to sell any okra at the farmer's market until I had enough pickled for the whole year for us to enjoy. And so I did that. We have some bok choy started for the fall. And in all honesty, that may be winter choy, which is supposed to be even more frost hardy. And there's okra. These rows have just been planted with kohlrabi and lettuces and kale. So there's a few small plants that have begun to come up. This burgundy variety of lettuce was an excellent seller at the farmer's market early in the season. So I definitely wanted to get more of those going. And this one is a French variety called Marvel of Four Seasons. And it was also highly productive, and it can tolerate quite a bit of frost. Here I have one of the patches of cowpeas, and cowpeas are members of like the black eyed pea family. And so far we have harvested 2.5 gallons of shelled peas for the black eyed peas, which is really like a dried bean. And they have been very prolific, but they are dying back, and I will end up letting them stay here and turning them back into the soil as like a green compost. I do have another row of okra, and then I do have some herbs in here as well. Here I have sage, which is nice in the fall when everyone starts thinking about making turkey and things like that. Some more sage there. as well as basil. I grew tons and tons of basil this year. I made a whole lot of pesto. Some of these okra have gotten really huge. I did this on purpose. These will be used for the seeds for next year. This is a variety I grew in Arizona very effectively, and I intend to continue growing it here because it has done well. This is another patch of the cowpeas. So I had black-eyed peas, Rouge de Betancourt, and Blue Goose were the three varieties I grew. And early on, the Rouge de Betancourt put on a lot of peas, and then later were the Blue Goose and the cowpeas, or sorry, the black-eyed peas. Let's see. They're dry. Hard to shell them with one hand. There we go. So there's your black-eyed peas that you're familiar with, but these guys have been a good producer. They're yummy to eat and they store well through the winter. Most everything is done on the trellis. I did plant a second round, a late round of cucumbers to go up the trellis here. And you can see there's a couple little guys on there. I don't know if they'll have an opportunity to mature before the frost. I hope they will. I have a whole lot of radishes. Now these are winter radishes, which are supposed to be eaten like fruit in China and Japan. This one is a watermelon radish. And then on this side is, I think it's Japanese shiso. And that one is supposed to taste like a pear. And this one is supposed to taste more like a watermelon. And it is pink on the inside when you slice it. They're quite big, and they do get a lot bigger. I harvested a couple this last week, and oh my goodness, they are spicy hot. So I guess they require frost in order to get that sweet flavor. So I have some younger ones in rows here, and I'm hoping that they do change to be sweet with frost because I have a whole lot of them and they're quite big. But they are supposedly eaten as fruit through the winter in the Oriental countries since most fruits don't grow. I also have some more lettuce and a couple little spinaches. I had planted a couple rows of them and they just, I think were eaten mostly by the grasshoppers. And of course, some more weeds. It's an ongoing battle to try and get weeds taken care of. Here, I don't have anything planted, but you can see a lot of what look like grasses. And I think these are mostly like wheat or something, some sort of a grain, because I had spread chicken manure here from the meat chickens we had raised, and there were seeds from their food that were in the manure and just in their litter. And this all grew up, and I figured I could use it as green compost.
Wheat. See the little berry?
Little wheat berry in there?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And there's also some peas, and that's just part of the chicken manure there. I had this whole trellis with my beans, which are like green beans, and I actually did Chinese red noodle beans, and these were so prolific. I don't even know how many. I probably canned about 50 jars, 50 quarts of those for the winter. So last year I froze them, and this year I decided to can them. Over here I had my squash mounds. These squash mounds were with the new manure, and they all died. I didn't harvest a single ripe squash this year as far as a winter squash. I did really well with zucchini and crookneck squash earlier in the old side of the greenhouse early in the year. And so I can tell you the things that we had in abundance this year that I was able to sell at the farmer's market included tomatoes, zucchini, crookneck squash, lots of greens as far as lettuce, mizuna, chard, spinach. I also sold some peppers this year. What else? Basil, watermelons, because we had tons of watermelons. The other melons, such as the cantaloupe and honeydew, and I can't even think what else, but we sold a lot at the farmer's market. Cucumbers were a huge seller. And right now I'm still selling okra and tomatoes. And next week I'll probably start selling some of the greens. So that's our walk around the garden. I didn't do a whole lot with sunflowers this year. I would like to do more next year because they did make good winter feed for the chickens. They really enjoyed them as a treat throughout the winter. But I'm going to try and get these tomatoes trimmed up and then do another little report. Well, I certainly didn't get all of the pruning done I would like to have, but at least everything is down away from the ceiling where it won't be touching for the first frost. And I'll just continue to work on these tomatoes as we have more time. And I did get this side of the greenhouse closed up. So really, it's not a big deal, but I like to pull all the weeds along the outside edge before I go ahead and close up the greenhouse. It just keeps things nicer. And so I got that done and started working on this side. And I've got about halfway, so I still need to work on a little bit more before I can get that closed up, and then we'll start keeping it nice and toasty in here, allow the daytime temperatures to get it warm in order to make up for those nighttime lows. But that's kind of where we're at for our October garden report. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to keep following our adventure.